Esteemed speakers, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and a very, very warm welcome to the third in the Brain Matters series hosted by the Human Brain Project. My name is Katrina Sickle. I'm a moderator and broadcaster, and I have the immense privilege of helping to bring to life these interactive discussions on, well, today's topic, brain-inspired technology and architectures. Now, if you've been joining us from the beginning of the series, you will know that the aim really is to present brain research, results and methods from within the Human Brain Project in a very dynamic and accessible way, because our audience ranges from the molecular biologist on the one end, and then I would say the interested, the curious to non-specialist on the other. Now, we don't take the word interactive lightly, ladies and gentlemen. Please don't forget that you can post a question, you can make a comment at any time in the chat bar of the social media platform from which you are joining this event. We won't post them until the second half of the webinar, and they will be curated for relevance and for brevity. Please do keep them super short, and for us, do say to whom your comment or question is addressed. Of course, you can be even more interactive throughout this webinar. All you need to do is tweet #BrainMatters at BrainProj. So that's all very clear. In today's edition, I'm joined by three scientists, and I would very much like you to meet them now. So could I ask our three guest speakers for today to please make themselves magically appear on screen? Thank you. There they are. So we have with us today, as you see, we have Rainer Goebel, Steve Furber and Chris Summerfield. Gentlemen, you need to do that very beatific smile when I just say a few words about each of you, okay? So you can just greet our audience with beautiful dental work. Professor Rainer Goebel, lovely to have you with us. You are director of the Maastricht Brain Imaging Center at Maastricht University. And in the Human Brain Project, if I am phrasing it correctly, you contribute to the research area Human Brain Organization, and you lead a project on visuomotor integration. And today you're going to talk about, well, I hope you're going to talk about what's being done in one of HBP's research topics in this final 3 years, adaptive networks for cognitive architectures from advanced learning to neurobiotics and neuromorphic applications. And that explores how the brain works from a computational perspective and aims to take the best from neuroscience and use it to make applications. So more on that in your presentation. We also have with us Chris Summerfield. He is Professor of Cognitive Neuroscience at Oxford University, and he works on the understanding of neural and computational mechanisms that underlie human perception and cognition. Now, he works with the AI research company DeepMind, and he has written previously, and it still holds true because we were talking before our webinar started. He has written with DeepMind that one often overlooked contribution to the remarkable progress in AI has been the use of ideas from experimental and theoretical neuroscience. And Chris is going to talk to us today about brain-inspired AI. We also have with us Steve Furber. He's a computer scientist, a mathematician, and a hardware engineer, currently ICL Professor of Computer Engineering in the Department of Computer Science at the University of Manchester. And Steve has built the largest neuromorphic supercomputer in the world, and which is used as a component of the neuromorphic computing platform for the Human Brain Project. And he is going to introduce the origins of bioinspired computing, origins which not only go back a long way, but might actually surprise you. So welcome, gentlemen. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. This is actually the first in the series which features an all-male lineup, and our upcoming webinars will continue to feature, well, a mix, a balance of female and male, an all-female lineup. Who knows? We have a lot of exciting stuff up our sleeve. But for this webinar, with you as guest speakers, we need some context to the content. And Rainer, as I mentioned, you are the leader of one of several research topics in this last 3-year phase of the Human Brain Project. And today's webinar focuses on one of them. So let me just give you a moment or two to tell us about that, please, so that we can frame our discussions today. Thank you.
Thanks, Katrina. It's a pleasure to talk about this research topic in which we want to better understand how the brain subserves functions like perception, cognition, but also how the brain controls how we act in our environment to achieve specific goals. And as you already said, we approach this topic from a computational perspective, building on the advanced computing infrastructure eBrains, which is provided by the Human Brain Project. And we also approach this topic from a large collaborative perspective, with teams of experts coming from multiple fields, including neuroscience, but also computer science, AI, engineering, and robotics. We think that we can make progress in our understanding how the brain works by emulating some aspects of its functions, from perception to action. More specifically, we create large-scale neural networks that are themselves composed of smaller modular neural networks that roughly correspond to brain regions. And building such overarching modular architecture is a little bit like a jigsaw puzzle, where we try to identify what the essential pieces are and how they're best fit together. I will go into more detail and present some examples later in my presentation.
Thank you. And I know that you work with a very multidisciplinary team, and that is part of the value here. That is what enables you to bring all of these parts of the jigsaw puzzle together. But as you say, you're going to talk very concretely and give us some lovely examples in your presentation later. So thank you very much. Gentlemen, this is an event in two parts. I'm going to have some time with each of you. Well, you will have your time to individually present. Then I'll bring you all back together. You can have a quick chat between yourselves, but I'm sure you are going to get a lot of questions. So we're going to move very swiftly in the second half of the webinar to see what sorts of comments and questions are coming in. So I'm going to ask Steve now and Raina to take a breather. You're in listening mode, as we say, and I'm going to ask Chris to stay with us. So Chris, you're going to kick off the conversation and tell us about brain-based AI. So the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you so much, Katrina. So like Katrina said, I'm going to really just kick us off by talking more generally about brain-inspired technology. And in doing so, I want to really, but first of all, to provide a precursor to the two talks which are going to follow, and then subsequently to the discussion which I hope we're going to have. So I guess the two areas of study which are relevant to thinking about brain-inspired technology, or two areas that are relevant, are first of all the fields of AI research and machine learning. So the goal of that field, as many of you will know, is to build intelligent information processing systems in silico, and to particularly machine learning to optimize them using statistical principles. And on the other hand, the fields of psychology and neuroscience, which seek to study the organization of cognition and behavior and how they're implemented in biological tissue. And so one way of thinking about the relationship between these two fields is that if AI and machine learning are trying to engineer brains, then you can think of psychology and neuroscience as trying to reverse engineer them or understand how they work. And for me, it's long been an inspiration that to think that these two fields might be in some way mutually reinforcing. So in other words, obviously, if we want to build brains, we need to understand how they work. But I think perhaps even more so, it is the very act of trying to build and simulate how brains might work that gives us a new handle on understanding them and feeds back to our knowledge in psychology and in neuroscience. And that's a motivating principle for me in my work. So, of course, engineering or understanding the brain is complicated. And that's because, in the words of Christoph Koch, who's the head of the Allen Institute for Brain Science, the brain is the most complex device in the known universe, or certainly the most complex known device in the known universe. So to give you a sense of that, adult human brain is just shy of a quadrillion connections. It is immensely powerful, but yet runs on only a small energy source equivalent to approximately that of a single light bulb. And so knowing how exactly we're going to build or recreate something which is even vaguely similar is, of course, an immense challenge. But what I want to do in the few minutes that remain is just give you a sort of a sense of three principles which I think are really, really important for thinking about building specifically about building brains, but also about understanding them and their scale, efficiency, and functional specialization. So thinking about scale first. So I think one of the really exciting things that inspires many researchers in AI and machine learning is the idea that brains might work by taking a simple principle and scaling it really, really big. So we've known for more than a century now that there is canonical structure to the way that cells are wired together, for example, in the neocortex. And that's illustrated on the left here in this beautiful drawing made by the Spanish scientist Ramon y Cajal over 100 years ago of the canonical microcircuit that we see in cortex. And I think the idea that excites many people is that perhaps if we take a simple wiring pattern and we scale it over and over, we replicate it so it gets bigger and bigger, and then we add connections, then we might have a powerful computational device. Now, of course, that idea is instantiated in many forms, and we're going to hear some about some of them today. But one way which has risen to prominence recently is in the architectures that are built into artificial neural networks or connectionist models. And today, over the last few years, we've witnessed a revolution in the power of these models in part through this scaling principle, the ability to build very big networks. And now they can do some really quite cool stuff. So what I'm showing you here, I hope you can see this video. So this is it's a video demo of someone using what is effectively an artificial neural network. They're using it to do generative language modeling. And what the researchers have done is they've trained the network to translate between human natural language and JavaScript, code in JavaScript. And they're using that to design in human natural language, in free text, a website that does things like produces a button that says rolls dice and then displays the value that's shown on it. And with no further information, the network is able to map between an understanding, just like you have an understanding of what that website looks like, and the code that is required to build it. And I think this is really impressive. But that achievement isn't possible at the moment, unless you build very big networks. And by very big networks, I don't mean networks with just 1 billion parameters. In fact, networks with just 1 billion parameters, as you can see in green, don't actually do very well on tasks like these. In order to achieve these impressive levels of performance, you need tasks that have upwards, at the moment, of 175 billion parameters. So these are absolutely gigantic models. So this shows the power of scale in this model, which was built by the research company OpenAI. So next I'm going to talk about efficiency. And going back to this theme, one of the challenges of this type of huge model at the moment is that they're deeply inefficient. And so artificial neural networks are very, very power hungry. And so we can estimate the cost of training a language model like the one I just described, which is known as GPT-3. And that cost in sheer energetic resources is gigantic, so more than 200,000 kilowatt hours. And that translates to a financial cost for a single training run of more than $4 million. So clearly this is not a scalable training pattern. And this is of course, very, very different to the lightweight, energy efficient computation that we see in biological systems. And so recently, one of the things that the Human Brain Project has been doing is trying to understand how we might map from the power of these artificial neural networks into systems that learn in different ways that are much more energy efficient. And I'm just highlighting here a breakthrough, which I think is really, really substantial. It's made by Wolfgang Maass and his colleagues at in the Technical Institute in Graz in Austria. And they developed a new way of training neural networks that are much more energy efficient, that rely on spikes, that is called eligibility propagation. It's on a series of benchmark tasks, can do just as well as the training algorithms that we use in standard neural networks. The last principle I want to talk about is functional specialization. And I think this is something which traditionally the Human Brain Project hasn't focused on. But as you will hear in Raina's talk, is currently focusing on much more, and we're going to be focusing on it much more over the next cycle. So the human brain, biological brains, are highly modular. That means that they're organized into different parts that do different specialized functions. And modularity confers a different form of efficiency by specializing circuits for different computations. And I think it's true that in AI research in general, the hard problem for the future is going to be not necessarily building components that do individual things. We already do that quite well. So we can build components already, for example, that do object recognition or planning. But rather, the hard problem is going to be to know how to wire up these modules into a single coherent system that actually does intelligent stuff. And where we have been able to do that, breakthroughs have already been made. So, for example, the landmark achievement of building a neural network that could play Go at a level which exceeded the world's strongest human, which was achieved a few years ago, was largely achieved by combining two existing techniques, basically object recognition or visual processing in a deep neural network, and a planning using a technique known as Monte Carlo tree search. And by combining those techniques, we were able to achieve something which is much more than the sum of the parts. That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. And a quick question for you. And again, I know it's been quite a feat to condense a tremendous amount, which you've done beautifully. And also thank you very much, preempted also what's coming and the links with your work and that of your colleagues. But very quick, I want to bring it in here, it might seem a bit off the wall, but when we are talking about advances in AI and machine learning, and when we are talking about the applications, the real life applications, the societal benefits, what are some of the pitfalls that we need to be thinking about in terms of values alignment? And I ask this because we visited the ethics question in all of the webinars. So just a moment.
Yeah, that's an absolutely fantastic question, and it's a question which resonates now. So already, even if you build the simplest, relatively narrow machine learning applications, for example, doing image recognition in the real world, in the real world, are already at risk of perpetuating biases which exist in the training data set, and, for example, engaging in discriminatory acts. We've already seen that. That's played out. There'll be numerous examples, which I'm sure some of you will have heard about in the media. And I think as we scale AI systems, the problem of value alignment becomes greater and greater. And I actually think there are two value alignment problems which are really interesting. So the first is, how do we build systems that do what we want? But the second value alignment problem, which is less referred to, is actually, I think, perhaps potentially the more pernicious one, which is that as we engage more and more with autonomous systems, it changes our behavior as well. And that's why already when, for example, we respond to curated content on social media by, for example, adopting views or extreme political views, or coming to believe in falsehoods rather than truth. And so the second value alignment problem is understanding how we ourselves will adapt and potentially align to agents. And that, I think, is a topic which, we could talk all day about that, but that's
absolutely fantastically interesting. We will need a whole other webinar on that, but thank you so much. Plenty to think about there. You are now allowed to relax off screen just momentarily, because we're going to hear from your two colleagues. So thanks for taking the hot seat right at the outset. And I'd like to ask to join me on screen now, please, Steve Furber. Steve, I didn't mention, I mentioned a little bit about your background, but what I didn't mention is that you have designed the BBC Micro, the ARM microprocessor, and you have, of course, also been with the project since the outset. So it would be really interesting to hear about the Bioinspired computing journey. I call it from source to spinnaker. So the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kat. Yes, I'm here to talk about the way we've developed brain-inspired computer technologies within the Human Brain Project. I'm from the University of Manchester in the UK, and of course Manchester has this place in computer history as being the place where the first implementation of Alan Turing's big idea from the 1930s of the universal computing machine was put into practice by Freddie Williams and Tom Kilburn, who are shown here in this 70-year-old picture. It ran its first program on Midsummer's Day, 1948. Now, we're interested in building computers that contribute to brain research. Of course, interest in the brain has been around for a long time, and one example that I find particularly interesting is The lady shown here, Ada Lovelace, who is known as an assistant to Charles Babbage when he built mechanical computing devices in Victorian times. Ada left us large numbers of notes on her work with Babbage, and these reside in a library in Oxford. But among her notes, she talks about understanding the brain, and she says, I've got hopes of getting cerebral phenomena such that I can put them into mathematical equations. I hope to bequeath to the generations a calculus of the nervous system. That was high ambition indeed 200 years ago, and even today we're not in a position where we can claim to be able to put the brain into mathematical equations, but our hope with the computing work that we've been developing is that we can contribute to advancing our understanding of the brain towards these kind of goals. Now, close to where I live, about 10 miles south of the middle of Manchester, is this rather inconspicuous British house. And over the arch, you can see to the left of the picture is the blue plaque, where in the UK we identify houses where famous people have lived. And this blue plaque says that Alan Turing, founder of computer science, lived and died here. And indeed, this is where Turing spent his last few years when he came to Manchester to use the machine on the opening slide. And while he was in Manchester, he worked on a number of topics, but most relevant here is the seminal paper he wrote on computing machinery and intelligence. And this starts with the words, I propose to consider the question, can machines think? And this was written in 1950, just 2 years after that machine ran its first program. And Turing was already pondering where this technology might lead. And in this paper, he develops a test for human-like artificial intelligence that he called the imitation game, but we simply know as the Turing test. And Turing would have been very surprised that even today, no computer has passed his test. And my personal view as to why human-like machine intelligence has proved so much harder than Turing and others since had expected is because we don't understand natural intelligence, the thing we're trying to imitate. And natural intelligence is built by the brain, and we don't understand how that works. Hence my interest in this area. Now, building brain-like computers, again, is not new. And the area of neuromorphic computing really started in the 1980s with Carver Mead at Caltech, where he observed close analogies between the equations that govern the flow of ions through ion channels into neurons and the equations that govern the flow of electrons in transistors operating in a particular region. And he founded the idea that by building electronic circuits close to the biological functions, we might better understand those functions and build useful systems. The Human Brain Project started off addressing three key questions: understanding the brain, I've already mentioned that; understanding brain diseases, which cost developed economies a huge amount of resources and, of course, affect the quality of life of many people and their families, but also developing future computing based on ideas from the brain. And that's really where our work fits into this, under this neuromorphic computing heading. And within the Human Brain Project, there are two neuromorphic computing platforms which are quite different in their approach to this problem. The Spinnaker machine that I'm going to spend most of my time talking about is really a big computer with interconnect, optimized for modeling the very high degree of connectivity we find in the brain. And so this is a form of simulation of the brain. By way of contrast, the Brainscales machine at Heidelberg implements electronic circuits much closer to Carver Mead's original ideas, and we talk about that as emulating the brain. Both of these systems have in common the fact that they've been designed by their respective teams from the transistor up to a large-scale computing resource. And so in the case of Spinnaker, we have the Spinnaker chip with 18 processor cores on. We can put this on the circuit board with just under 1,000 cores, and then we can build machines. For the example here is the Human Brain Project platform, which has 1 million ARM processor cores in it. And this allows us to scale up in the way that Chris described to very large scale models, and we can incorporate the sorts of numbers of parameters that he was talking about in artificial neural net systems. Now, this big machine in Manchester is not the only Spinnaker machine. We've been loaning and selling and distributing boards to research labs around the world, and there are about 100 out there at the moment. What can Spinnaker do? Well, it was designed for computational neuroscience. It can also contribute to theoretical neuroscience by testing hypotheses of brain function. And because it's being designed as a real-time system, it's useful in neurorobotics, where it can implement spiking neural networks to control robots in real time. And all those three areas of research are active within the Human Brain Project. As an example of computational neuroscience, Spinnaker was the first machine anywhere to support a real-time model of a cortical microcircuit. This model was developed in collaboration with researchers at Jülich in Germany. This runs in real time on Spinnaker, and this was a major milestone in our development of brain circuits. Chris also mentioned eligibility propagation. This is a model developed at TU Graz and implemented on Spinnaker amongst other machines. And it has the interesting characteristic that the system can learn going forward, whereas conventional learning mechanisms require time to be stopped and then run backwards for the learning to have its impact. Whereas with eProp on systems such as Spinnaker, learning can be continuous with time going forward all the time. So those are a couple of examples. If you want to know more about Spinnaker, there's an open access book, but I won't go through that. I'll stop at that point. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. And again, for condensing so much into a very beautiful 7-minute presentation. Have you, obviously, you know the contents of that book end to end and back to front, Steve, is that correct?
I did not write every word in it, but it was written by many members of my team in Manchester and several of our collaborators outside Manchester as well. So there are many contributors. But yes, I have a pretty good idea what's in there.
I love that. I have a typical British understatement. I'm going to ask you a silly question and then a serious question. The first is, you said there, look at that sort of nondescript house where there's a blue plaque where famous people live. Do you have a blue plaque outside your house, Steve? Because you are not unknown, are you? No, I was just checking. I can't come and pay you a visit with COVID happening. So I was just checking in with you there. Very important question, I think, to make this link and to continue the narrative that we do have in today's webinar. How does neuromorphic computing differ from AI?
The main differentiator of neuromorphic computing systems is that they use a computing model called event-based processing. And this follows the idea that in the biological brain, neurons communicate principally by sending spikes, which are pure electrochemical impulses that just signal that something happened at a point in time. And Spinnaker and other neuromorphic systems adopt this model of computation. So everything in the system is driven by spikes or events.
Okay, well, more on that in a bit. I think I know, and I want to just remind everybody, I just turn to our audience again, don't forget you can post a question or a comment, because we will have a good 20-25 minutes to wrestle with some of the issues that you want to put on the table, and I will bring all of these gentlemen back together. So thank you so much, Steve. You can take a short breather while I invite your colleague to come and join me. So Rainer Goebel, if you can make yourself present. There you are. Hello, lovely to see you. So we've heard from your peers about the basic principles of learning from the brain-inspired AI. We've learned about the history behind the new computer architecture, so the brain-inspired technology. Now, you've been actually with HBP since I think about a year after Steve, is that correct? As I said, you're leading a very exciting research topic that explores where and how AI needs neuroscience. So just tell us in more detail what cognitive architectures are.
Thanks very much, Katrina. And it's a pleasure to explain what it is. Actually, a cognitive architecture is something very ambitious because it tries to emulate functions like perception, like thinking, like motor output. So basically the whole story from what we see and hear until we act. Of course, that's a super ambitious goal, and there are only small, realistic implementations of that. But nonetheless, to kind of have the ambition to build such cognitive architecture is very important, and to make substantial progress in that direction can be done. That's at least our philosophy. An important point here is that a cognitive architecture is not just looking at a small function like object recognition, but as I said, goes really from input to internal processes like decision making to the output. And this is also why our work is strongly related to robotics, because we want that our simulated brains really act in an environment so that we can test, does it really work? Does a closed loop from perception to action is really like humans do it and behave? And that's actually why we do this kind of cognitive architectures. And of course, you could build them, and they are built with classical AI. You don't need for that neural networks in principle, but the success is limited of those. And therefore, we in the Human Brain Project, we approach the cognitive architectures as a brain-inspired endeavor, where we basically use a lot of knowledge of the brain to kind of constrain how we build the cognitive architectures. So what we do is, from the areas of the brain we know its function, we basically try to mimic modules, which are neural networks, within our cognitive architecture. And at the end, the challenging task is to kind of orchestrate the different modules so that they work together to then fulfill indeed a coherent task: perceive, think, act. This is actually the challenge. And this kind of brain inspiration is what separates us from other more technically oriented topics. To tell you a little bit more what we do, I want to now show you 3 examples of cognitive architectures at various stages of development, that you get an impression how this works. So the first one is actually a more recent development, where we try to understand how our brain fulfills the marvelous task to do dexterous hand manipulations, finger movements. Imagine you want to go into your home in the evening, coming back from shopping, and then you want to use your key to open the door. So you have the key in your hand, but you have to move it first in a way that it looks to the front so that you can really move it correctly in the lock. You might not think much about it, but what you do here is enormous. It's complicated. You have to control your finger movements and your hand to achieve that. And we want to understand how the brain is doing that by emulating this function. Just another example. You have your phone upside down in your hand, and you can just flip it around to look towards you. How is this possible? How is the brain controlling these actions? So we basically developed a visual motor architecture, which you see here, where all the components, I will not explain them all, but all the components have corresponding brain areas, which we know from brain imaging and other neuroscientific methods, roughly what they are doing. So we put this architecture brain-inspired together, where the system gets eyes, it can see the hand, it can see an object in the hand, and then we kind of train the network using reinforcement learning to better and better perform certain actions. And this is a quite a realistic type of learning. And what we achieve then is what you see on the right side. So our cognitive architecture controls a robotic hand, and has learned from initially random finger movements, has now learned to kind of move each finger towards the thumb and makes coordinated finger tapping tasks. This is just the beginning. We will continue that. But this is just showing you that we have really a closed system where the hand has haptic kind of sensations, and the robotic system also sees the hand and learns to better and better coordinate the fingers to do goal-directed finger movements. The second example I have is, I think, very interesting, because it shows a little bit what also Chris alluded to, that not only goes neuroscience into AI, but often AI inspires neuroscience and leads to potentially new discoveries. And one of our own research I want to share with you. So here we developed a cognitive architecture which simulates where humans look at in a visual scene. And you might also not usually think about that, but we have only a small foveal vision where we see sharp, so we have to scan with eye movements the scene to really see what's in the scene. And we can record that. So we can record where humans look at. And we can use that recorded data to train deep learning networks to perform eye movements in a way humans do that. And that's actually the goal here. We have actually a larger architecture, again, which gets eyes, which kind of processes an input. It programs saccadic eye movements and really in a robotic system performs these eye movements. So it's a complete visual motor architecture. But I will focus only, because that gave us the most insights into brain function, I will focus only on one component, the saliency prediction. That means where people attend to and where they make eye movements to in the visual scene. So I want to contrast that to the classical theory, which is very famous in neuroscience and psychology, and is used to kind of explain where humans look at and other species. And you see here on the right side an input to that model, a natural image, and indeed the model correctly, after some stages of processing, kind of in this heat map with the bright colors, indicates that there is something interesting, like this post here, this emergency, and this sign here on the left side. This system, which I will not go into detail because of time, is shown here on the left, works pretty well in some scenes. But we found out it doesn't work well in other scenes. And we wanted to find out why not and how could we improve that. So we built a deep learning network, a so-called encoder-decoder network, and basically used a lot of natural images as input, like shown here on the left, run it through the network, which analyzes the features until high-level object features. But then we did not ask it to recognize and say what object you see in the scene, but we asked it to kind of show us in the two-dimensional image space which location is interesting, where you want to look at. And this is shown here at this white heat map there. And when we trained that model, we found out that it was coming amazingly close with new images, not shown during training, really using them later for testing. And we found that the system indeed looks like humans at important information, like here on the two screens and the face. This is the humans. Ground truth is what humans are looking at. And that's what our model predicts where humans will look at. And it matches almost perfectly. Just two other examples. Here, the cakes. Our model looks to the cakes as humans do. Or here, this is a scene which is interesting because there is a human in the face there. And that's what humans focus on. And that's also what the model predicts where humans will look at and where the model itself controls its eye movements too. And this gives you maybe a hint why our model performs here well, because our deep learning model can learn also higher level visual semantic information. For example, we look at things, and that was our insight, we look at things in the scene which have semantic relevance, like a face is super relevant. Like here, we want to read that text here on this thing here. And that's exactly where the humans and the model now looks at. And that's I think, quite striking. Just a last comparison. So here on the right is the classic model. This is what humans do, and this is what our model predicts. And if you compare that our model is very close to what humans do. Whereas the classical model, as it was also designed, looks at local contrast. So it finds edges. It doesn't look at the face. It likes much more the contrast of these lines here. So the model is basically distracted by local contrasts. And I want not to say that humans can also look to local contrasts and find them interesting. But if there is a human, something more semantically relevant, we look at the semantic information. And that's precisely how our model differs from the classical model. So this is interesting because this leads to that we can now test this hypothesis. For example, the classic model predicts here that we get local contrasts and saliency, but our model predicts that this also uses higher level visual information. And we can test this now by high-field, high-resolution brain imaging to test whether this really happens like this in the brain. And we're currently doing that. And this is an example how such an architecture gets inspired by deep learning and AI, but now brings it back to testable hypotheses in the human brain. The last example I make very, very short now because my time is running up. Just want to say we also go more and more in the last phase of HPP into higher level cognitive processes. And we currently built on neuroscience data our initial architectures for higher level processes. For example, here is one example I have worked many years with my team on, which is mental imagery. Here you see a feed-forward network where an image is processed, and at the end you see that the system says, for example, bird. But in our idea we want to make models which reverse this process. Mm-hmm. So you start with abstract concepts, for example, like bird, and your system generates top-down with generative networks a mental image in your mind of a bird. And this is a big feat of our brain, which is not yet modeled very well in artificial neural networks. And we wanted to first constrain our architecture by looking how the brain is doing that. And what we did is we showed people in the scanner letters like H, T, S, C. These letters say C activates the visual cortex. And then we use the activity here to reconstruct what people see. And we can actually nicely reconstruct the letters they see. But now comes the trick to test whether generative networks go from high levels up to these lower levels there in top-down manner. We basically now tell the people, simply imagine letters. We don't show them to them. Just tell them, imagine C, imagine H, and so on. And then if this information goes really down to the early visual cortex, where the mind's eye kind of is represented, then we basically should be able to decode the letters in this early visual cortex. And that's precisely what we could do. So we can now read out and visualize the images from the visual cortex. And now we get knowledge from the brain to build a mental imagery architecture. But the real challenge is, and now I come to the end, is how can we integrate all these different developments, which we do in HPP, and this were just 3 examples, into overarching cognitive architectures, where you have all these things in one larger overarching scaled network. And this is a challenge. And me as a leader of this research topic have this challenging task to integrate many different people's work into this to make a fruitful result. But although this is very challenging, I'm very excited to do this work because we will bring forward our understanding how the brain generates the mind.
Thank you. And again, so much to say, and you are so passionate and oh, yes, I am on unmute. I thought for a moment no one could hear me, but we're good. And I can see exactly, where your passion lies in this. And as a leader of this particular topic area, super interesting. Just before I invite the other 2 gentlemen, because there are lots of questions coming in, so we're going to have to do this kind of like a very high level game show very rapidly for you, please, Rainer. We talk about applications always in our webinars. So what's the societal value? Give me very briefly an example. Where is that real life application? Why should it matter to me?
Yeah, the saliency model where we can predict now where humans look at is already used in some robotic systems, which even have contacts to industrial applications. So this can be relevant, for example, if we at one point have robots in hospitals which are becoming a bit more smart, understanding the environment. This will be maybe a small contribution towards that. The imagery, when we read out these kind of mental images, could be useful, for example, if you have locked-in patients who cannot speak anymore, cannot move. And that's actually the motivation behind that study originally in an ERC-funded project. And that basically means that we want to really help people to communicate by reading out their images of the mind's eye. But it's, of course, also very important and exciting just to know how the brain is doing these marvelous things.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you so much. So without further ado, let me ask your 2 colleagues to join you, please, on screen. And originally I thought, let's all have a chat together, gentlemen, but no, we have a lot of questions. The clock is ticking. So I'm going to ask you, please, to treat this, as I said, like a very high level, a university challenge. It's almost fingers on the buzzers, please. So let's see if we have some questions that can be shown on screen. Brilliant. So Steve, for you first, as concisely, you can see here, motivated by the explanations of Chris, what is the scale and efficiency of Spinnaker?
So Spinnaker employs 1 million ARM processor cores. it can model hundreds of millions of neurons with hundreds of billions of synapses. So that's the scale. The efficiency, of course, is well down on biology. If the full machine is very busy, it can consume up to about 100 kilowatts compared with the 20 watts of the brain. But that's the price you pay for having a flexible machine where you can change the neuron types and learning rules and so on using software.
Okay, thank you. Let's move directly on to the next question, if there is for another of our speakers. There we go, Raina. Could brain simulations be used to explore the efficacy of drugs on the brain and therefore make pharmaceutical assistance easier and faster and more adequate?
Yes, actually the work I presented is not targeted at this application because the models we use have not many ingredients which you would need to that. For example, no neurotransmitters and processes and structures we would need for that. But colleagues in the HPP actually exactly work on this. So therefore, of course, my topic I represent is not encompassing all work in the HPP. But you can see that if you have neurons, simulated neurons which interact, you should actually, to make them biologically more realistic, include at some point, when we go from function more to realistic neuroscience downward, that's what we do. At some point, we would also add neurotransmitters which can be modulated, and then by pharmaceutical ingredients, for example, then we could model these effects. But in our kind of model, this is not done.
Okay, thank you. You could almost have delivered that just in mine, Raina, because you are, I love it. You are so expressive. I think even if we'd have the sound off, we would have understood what your reply is. There is a lot coming in, so thank you for being so concise, gentlemen. Here's one for all of you. So feel free to raise your hand if you want to go. First, can clinical neuropsychology help in some way in your field? So who would like to come in here?
I can say something very briefly. So clinical neuropsychology has traditionally taught us that different bits of the brain do different things. And I think it's sometimes something that we sometimes forget in neuroscience. So sometimes, we, particularly when we look at, for example, images that are recorded from brain imaging studies, like the ones that Raina talked about, sometimes we get the impression that, everything is kind of connected to everything and, kind of there's blobs here and blobs there. But neuropsychology reminds us that, there is a high degree of functional specialization. And I think that's an important lesson for building technology of all sorts.
Okay, well, go for it. Yes.
Just to add, I fully agree, of course, with Chris, but just to add one point, it has also the advantage over brain imaging to be causal. Because if you have a lesion, you know for sure, if a certain function fails, you know that contributes causally to that function. In imaging, it's not easy to derive that. You need special techniques like TMS and others to try to infer that. But what I also always admired in clinical neuropsychology is this causal link which you can have.
Okay, let's move on. Thank you. For someone from a cognitive neuroscience background, what additional skills do you think are most important? That's a nice question, to work in the interface of AI and neuroscience. That's a lovely question. Who would like to kick us off there?
Maybe if the others don't want to go, I'm happy to say something. So yes, I think that there are new fields being born as we speak, and they involve multidisciplinary skills. So I think what you learn as in cognitive neuroscience can be immensely valuable, because cognitive neuroscientists learn about the different things that brains can do and learn about their large scale organization. But I think to really, if you want to really work in AI research, then quantitative skills are non-negotiable, and so strong training in statistics, maths, computer science, or even a really strong quantitative discipline like physics, understanding how neural networks and dynamical systems in general work is really critical.
Raina, yeah.
Maybe just to add to this, as Chris alluded to implicitly, that means you cannot just do a bachelor on that topic yet. Actually, we in Maastricht and in our university, we just devised a new bachelor program called Brain Sciences, which is heavily inspired by the Human Brain Project, to educate exactly the fields Chris mentioned, but so that you kind of get a more concerted training on these valuable topics. So I think this will also change. Maybe new educational programs will emerge, which more focus on exactly these kind of interfaces between AI and neuroscience.
Now, Steve is there. As the light is falling in Manchester, you can see Steve is becoming shadowy and sphinx-like. But I know that there are some questions for you, Steve. So let's see what's coming up next. Here we go. Good one. When will Spinnaker 2 be available, and what are its focus, its benefits, and its features?
I didn't have time in my talk to get into the details of what we're doing for the next generation, but of course the Spinnaker 1 machine is now 10-15-year-old technology, and we have been developing a second generation, which this questioner clearly knows about. And the answer, when will it be available, is the final Spinnaker 2 chip will be going to fabrication sometime next year. And its focus and benefits are, because of it, it'll be a more advanced technology. It'll be something like 10x the performance density and efficiency of Spinnaker 1. It'll also have a number of accelerators that we've learned from Spinnaker 1 will be very valuable in accelerating models. It'll also support artificial nets, conventional AI, as well as spiking nets, so hybrid systems become possible. And unlike Spinnaker 1, it's targeted not only at supporting large-scale applications, but also small-scale applications, so real practical applications of event-based AI.
Thank you. Okay, I was giving a chance if anybody wanted to, within our panel, sort of comment on that, on what's coming and upcoming technology in general. You're happy to just listen to each other. We've got plenty more questions, so I will continue to play this verbal musical chairs. Is there a future that you see with quantum computers and brain modeling within them? So yes, indeed, Steve, I was waiting for you to raise your hand. Thank you.
So probably no and no. But I think, I think quantum computing is an interesting area. There are many interesting quantum technologies outside using quantum for computation, but quantum computers themselves have a rather limited area of applicability. I think they will never replace standard computers. They're not as general purpose as conventional machines. They will, in a similar way to neural and neuromorphic accelerators, they will always complement standard computers. But the things they do well are different from the things that neuromorphic and neural accelerators do well. So they will emulate quantum systems, they will perform searches effectively, but they will not model brains as far as I can see.
Let me just, while I'm with you, Steve, because we are going from, we're taking in a lot of diverse issues here. So I'm going to take advantage of that, because there was one thing I wanted to come back to you, because we had talked about values and ethics. I'd raised that with Chris, and I do just want to tackle one of the pertinent issues, which relates to AI and neuromorphics, and that's of dual use. And I wondered if, just continuing on from that question about ethics, whether you had anything else, whether you had anything that you could comment on there.
Well, the HPP has a whole strand of ethical surveillance of all the activities within the project, and the neuromorphic area probably receives a bit less attention than some of the more obviously sensitive biology-related areas. But the prime issue in neuromorphics is the issue of dual use. That anything we develop that's applicable, in domestic vacuum cleaners is probably applicable in military systems as well. So obviously within the project rules, we can't work directly with any military technology, but it's inevitable that any reasonably flexible general purpose computing device has a range of applications that spill over into the military domain.
Right, let's go back to some questions, because it's 16:54 and I have a final question for each of you, so I want to leave a little bit of space for that. But let's see what else has come in, perhaps something again for Raina or for Steve again, and then let's see. I've seen other questions come in for you two gentlemen. So here we go. How do you imagine Spinnaker will evolve in future decades? Will it get smaller or bigger?
I think I partly answered this question in response to the question about Spinnaker 2. I think Spinnaker 2 is the next evolution of Spinnaker. it will deliver much higher functional density. So in that sense, the same function will get smaller. It will also be scalable to large systems. So the proportion of the brain it can encompass will get larger. I mean, just to be clear, the 1 million cores in the current Spinnaker machine is nowhere near capable of simulating a whole human brain. It's more at the mouse brain level in terms of what we can encompass. And Spinnaker 2 will take a step upwards, but still be quite a long way short of full human brain.
Okay. If we have anything else, I don't know if there's anything outstanding for other two gentlemen. If not, then I will take the floor. I did want to bring in something personal, actually, with you, Raina, as we have these last minutes. And that is that, we talked before this webinar about, your path of study, and you were very clear about the benefits of working with a multiple team, bringing in multiple insights. That was actually critical within this context of cognitive architectures. And your path of study has followed multiple disciplines: psychology, computer science, and this project HBP and this particular research topic has enabled you to bring this together, and I sense that that's partly where your passion comes from. Is that right?
It's absolutely right, because I did my PhD in my early scientific career in neural nets. I was at the Connectionist summer schools with all the people at that time, and it was very fascinating. But then I kind of drifted away because I thought this is too theoretical. It doesn't really lead us forward to understand the brain really well. And then functional brain imaging came up with human fMRI, and I jumped on this wagon and became quite good at it and have a big team on this. But then I was always sad that I can no longer really do the neural net modeling and to kind of simulate what we learn about the brain. And when I entered the Human Brain Project, this is actually exactly what I can do now. And not only can I integrate empirical neuroscience and modeling, but I can also bring it even into the neurorobotics, so that the models we build can be now run on these kind of brain-inspired technologies. And importantly, the simulations require huge amounts of compute power, and we get this provided by the Human Brain Project. So I can only say that for me, this is a very, very exciting time now to benefit from all these resources and IT developments, e-brains, to do this kind of work. And it kind of brings together two of my previous independent lines of research.
Thank you. I'm going to come to you, Chris, if I may. You've been very much in listening mode there. Now, there were some questions coming in and things that you wanted to articulate. And I also wanted to give you a chance, more than 30 seconds, even though we have 4 minutes left, to just give us a kind of a brief overview of the outlook for AI research, because we haven't looked at that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, there's a lot of excitement at the moment about the progress, the potential progress, because we've made rapid progress over recent years. There's some people hope that we will continue to make rapid progress and maybe even build systems that exhibit intelligence that approximates our own human intelligence. Others, of course, are more skeptical and think that this might be, another era of irrational exuberance fueled by big dollars and, a lot of hype. My view sort of lies somewhere in between those two. I think that we will do amazing things with artificial intelligence. We continue to do amazing things with artificial intelligence. Many of you will have heard just last week an extraordinary leap forward in structural biology that was achieved through a deep learning method applied to protein folding. It's a potentially game-changing advance. I think we'll see many more of those. But I think that the technologies that we do see deployed will not be like, if they are intelligent, they won't be intelligent in the way that we are intelligent, not least because we get most of our intelligence from social others, from our friends, our families, our colleagues, our peers. And it's very unlikely that we would ever interact, I think, with AI systems in the way that we interact with other humans.
And do you think, just before I come to Steve, do you think that when I say we, it's a very generic we? I mean, we're taking in everything from those who are working in AI to the media. Do you think we need to work harder to make the average Joe, the average citizen, the average person have less fear around this? Because we are talking as well, the background is applications, societal benefits, but there is still a lot of fear around it. Are you seeing that change? Are you seeing that evolve? People are less afraid?
I think people should both be less afraid and more afraid. I think they should be less afraid of the type of AI that they see in the movies. And I think they should be more afraid of the type of AI that is introduced by stealth into the devices that they use every day, into their browsers, into their telephones, into the financial markets that control their pension funds, into the curation of information on social media. I think it's not superintelligence that we should be worried about. I think it's the relatively simple and relatively stupid machine learning technologies which have the potential to detrimentally have a huge impact on our society even today.
Thank you very much. Again, as you said before, we could have a whole webinar series on that alone. So thank you very much. We scratched the surface, but very nice food for thought to take away. And Steve, there was the question there about Spinnaker 2, and you did get a chance to talk about that. Is there anything else that you need to just spill the beans on in terms of any exciting upcoming developments in technology, what you see coming up soon?
I think, well, technology is advancing still at a pace. Moore's law, which has traditionally driven the shrinkage of transistors and provided more functionality per unit cost and per unit energy, is hitting some serious physical limits. But what's really exciting in technology at the moment is the way we're going into the third dimension. So today's microchips are pretty much two-dimensional, and there's lots of scope going into the third dimension. I think also in the context of this seminar, the convergence between sort of neuromorphic brain-inspired computing and mainstream AI is very exciting. I think brain scientists have quite a lot to learn from AI, as well as the other way around. Okay, and I think over the next decade we're going to see that synergy of those two disciplines into some very exciting outcomes.
Thank you very much. And I think people have got a very good sense of why and how that will be from this webinar today. In 1 hour, we've packed in so much, gentlemen, and I really do thank you very, very much for giving us your time and your brain power in this 1 hour and sharing with us all of your expertise and your ideas. It's been hugely interesting. I would like to extend my thanks as well, ladies and gentlemen of the audience, to the communications and digital teams who work very, very hard behind the scenes to prepare this and to keep the lights on when we are actually on screen. And of course, I thank you very much for turning up and tuning in and entertaining us and keeping these gentlemen on their toes with all of your questions and comments. So thank you. For upcoming webinars, all you need to do is keep your eye on the HBP website, and please don't forget to spread the word via Twitter, or indeed reach out to this thriving community. So that's it from me, Katrina Sickle. It was an absolute pleasure to share the screen with my guest speakers and the virtual space with all of you. So gentlemen, to you, my thanks. I wish you a very, very good evening. And ladies and gentlemen, to you too, keep safe, keep well as the Christmas season comes upon us. Thank you very, very much, and good evening.